There comes a moment in every life when the mirror of others' approval shatters, and we are left with nothing but our own reflection staring back at us. For some, this is a frightening discovery. For others, it is the first taste of true freedom. We are conditioned, from childhood onward, to believe that harmony is bought at the price of compliance, that love is earned by submission, and belonging by self-denial. Yet, when the compulsion to please others finally dissolves, we awaken to a hidden truth. We were never born to live as shadows of expectation, but as flames of authenticity. What follows when we break free from this need is not chaos, but transformation. It is not rebellion for its own sake, but a return to one's rightful center. Let us explore what unfolds when this shift takes place. The word no is small, almost fragile in its sound, yet it carries the weight of centuries of unspoken truths. It is the boundary line that separates the self from the demands of the world, and it is often the first word that reveals whether a person has begun to claim their life as their own. For the one who has lived as a people pleaser, this word feels dangerous, almost like a weapon that could wound relationships, sever bonds, or lead to abandonment. The fear is deep and primal, because within us all rests the old memory of childhood, when to be accepted was to survive, and to displease those around us risked rejection and exile. The need to be pleasing is born in this ancient soil, but if it remains unchecked, it grows into a silent chain binding us to a life that is not our own. To utter no in such a life feels at first like rebellion. It shakes the very structure of one's identity. For the people pleaser has long mistaken compliance for love and sacrifice for virtue. Yet when we finally dare to speak it, not in anger but in clarity, we discover that the world does not collapse, but instead rearranges itself around a deeper truth. No becomes a mirror reflecting the dignity of our existence. It is not the rejection of another, but the affirmation of the self. I recall a woman who had spent years as the silent backbone of her workplace. She carried the burdens others laid upon her shoulders, saying yes to every task, every extra duty, every late hour demanded of her. She believed that her value resided in her availability, that her worth was proven by her willingness to endure. Yet inside, resentment smoldered. The fatigue she carried into her home eroded her relationships, and the quiet bitterness she swallowed became an unspoken poison in her heart. When at last she summoned the courage to say no, to decline an unnecessary task that did not belong to her, she braced herself for rejection, for the unraveling of everything she had built. Instead, she was met with respect. Her colleagues, rather than scorning her, began to recognize her as someone who carried authority over her own life. It was not her compliance that earned their respect, but her boundaries. This is not an isolated story. Research in organizational psychology confirms what experience already teaches us. Those who draw boundaries are not viewed as selfish, but as competent, confident, and trustworthy. To refuse when necessary is not to abandon others, but to stand as an equal among them. To be endlessly accommodating does not win love, it only diminishes authenticity. Saying no does not make us cold, it makes us whole. When we clear the false obligations that weigh upon us, we make room for the true obligations of the soul. Every no becomes a gateway to a deeper yes. The mother who declines another evening of overtime says yes to her children's laughter at the dinner table. The exhausted student who refuses a night out says yes to rest and renewal, which will nourish creativity the next day. The man who refuses to live according to his family's rigid expectations says yes to the path of his own becoming. These yeses are not always visible to others, but they are felt within like water returning to the roots of a long, thirsty tree. It is a paradox that many struggle to see. To deny every demand is not selfishness, but balance. The one who never says no becomes fragmented, pulled apart by the expectations of everyone around them. Their yes loses its power because it no longer comes from choice, but from compulsion. A yes without freedom is no longer a gift, it is a mask. But when the word no is spoken consciously, it restores meaning to every yes that follows. In the quiet of reflection, we must ask ourselves, how many times have we betrayed our own needs for fear of disappointing another? How many moments of joy, of rest, of creativity have we forfeited on the altar of compliance? And what did it truly give us in return? Did it bring the love we sought, or did it hollow us out? The truth, often painful to admit, is that pleasing rarely secures genuine affection. It may win temporary approval, but approval is fickle and fleeting. True respect, true intimacy, comes not from pleasing others, but from standing as ourselves in their presence. There is a story I once heard of a man who spent his whole life trying to be agreeable. He nodded along with every opinion, bent himself to fit every group, never spoke the thought that might stir conflict. He was liked by many, but deeply known by none. At his funeral, people said he was kind, but few could say who he truly was. His fear of disappointing others had erased his face from his own life. This is the tragedy of perpetual pleasing. It robs us of the chance to be seen, to be remembered, to live authentically. To learn to say no, then, is an act of profound courage. It is to declare that our existence is not merely an instrument for the satisfaction of others, but a song that has its own melody. It is to recognize that boundaries are not walls, but doorways through which authentic connection, creativity, and well-being can enter. Without them, life becomes a blur of obligations without meaning. With them, life sharpens into focus, and we begin to walk a path that is truly ours. Consider also how children observe this lesson. A parent who never sets limits teaches their child that self-sacrifice is the price of acceptance. But a parent who models healthy boundaries shows their child that love and individuality can coexist, that one can care for others without losing oneself. To say no in front of others, then, is not only self-liberation. It is teaching by example, planting seeds of authenticity in those who watch us. There will be moments when this journey feels lonely. Some will not understand. Those who depended on our compliance may resist or withdraw. Yet this too is a revelation, for it reveals which relationships were genuine and which were sustained only by our willingness to disappear. What remains after the storm are the connections rooted in truth, the bonds that endure because they are nourished by authenticity rather than performance. In the end, the word no is not a weapon but a compass. It points us back to our inner world, to the center where our deepest values reside. It clears the noise of endless demands so that the quiet voice within can be heard. And when we begin to listen to that voice, when we allow it to guide us, we discover that life is not something to be endured in the service of others' expectations, but something to be lived fully, consciously, and with dignity. The power of saying no is, in truth, the power of becoming oneself. It is the first step out of the prison of approval and into the open air of freedom. It is the reclaiming of time, of energy, of soul. And it is the beginning of a life where every yes we give flows from authenticity, from love, and from the sacred responsibility of living as who we truly are. When the mask of people pleasing is finally removed, a quiet revolution begins to take place in the realm of human connection. For many years, perhaps even decades, one may have believed that relationships are maintained by agreement, by compliance, by the subtle art of self-erasure. To disagree was to invite conflict. To assert one's own needs was to risk abandonment. And so the performance continued. Smiles were worn like armor, silence was offered in place of truth, and flattery was dispensed like currency. On the surface, such a life appeared harmonious. Friends gathered, partners stayed, colleagues seemed satisfied. Yet beneath it all, there remained an emptiness, a gnawing suspicion that none of it was entirely real. It was not connection that had been built, but performance, and like all performances, it demanded endless energy while offering little nourishment in return. But when the need to please falls away, relationships begin to change, often in startling and unexpected ways. The bonds that depended on your silence, on your false agreement, or on your willingness to deny yourself, these will not endure. At first, this feels like loss, as though something precious has slipped through your hands. Yet in truth, what disappears is not love, but illusion. The friendships that vanish when you finally speak your mind were never friendships at all. The partnerships that falter when you reveal your true desires were never built on mutual respect, but on the fragile scaffolding of control and compliance. What remains, however, is the treasure, relationships that are tested and found genuine. When you no longer play the role of the agreeable shadow, those who truly value you will not flee. Instead, they will step closer, drawn by the authenticity you now radiate. These connections, stripped of pretense, deepen into something far more enduring than the shallow comfort of constant approval. They are rooted in honesty, in vulnerability, in the sacred exchange of truth. Imagine the difference between two friends. One agrees to every plan, nods to every opinion, and hides their exhaustion for fear of disappointing the other. At first glance, such a friend seems loyal, always available, always accommodating. But slowly the bond grows hollow, for the person you believe you know is only a reflection of your desires. Their silence leaves you speaking not with a soul, but with a mask. Now consider the friend who says, "I cannot meet tonight, I need rest," or "I hear your view, but I see it differently." At first, such honesty may sting, yet over time it builds trust, because you come to realize this person is real. They will not lie to you to keep the peace, nor vanish beneath the weight of endless sacrifice. They will meet you as themselves, and that is the ground where true intimacy grows. Psychology affirms what human experience whispers. Vulnerability and authenticity are the foundations of lasting connection. When we hide our true selves, we offer others only a facade, and though they may accept the mask, they cannot touch the soul behind it. It is only when we dare to reveal who we are, even at the risk of disagreement or conflict, that others are invited into real relationship. And though conflict may arise, it is not the enemy we imagine it to be. Conflict, when met with respect and honesty, is the crucible in which deeper understanding is forged. It strips away illusion and forces us to see one another as whole beings rather than idealized projections. Think of a marriage where one partner constantly yields, always agreeing, never voicing dissatisfaction. At first it appears peaceful. There are no arguments, no open wounds. Yet beneath the surface, resentment festers. The unspoken truths pile up like stones in the heart, and eventually the silence becomes unbearable. Compare this to a marriage where disagreements are voiced, where differences are acknowledged, and where both partners bring their full selves to the table. Yes, there may be storms. Yes, there may be sharp words and difficult nights. But in the midst of this struggle, there is growth, and in growth there is intimacy. The second marriage, though noisier, is far stronger, for it is rooted not in illusion but in reality. The same holds true for friendships, families, and even professional relationships. Consider the workplace. The employee who constantly agrees with their superior may seem loyal, but in truth they deprive the organization of honest feedback, of creative tension, of growth. The employee who dares to respectfully disagree contributes far more, even if their words are uncomfortable to hear. Authenticity is not only the ground of personal intimacy, but also of collective strength. Yet the transformation that follows the abandonment of people-pleasing is not only external, it is deeply internal as well. When you no longer perform for others, you begin to feel, perhaps for the first time, that you are truly seen. The fear of abandonment that once haunted you begins to fade, replaced by the profound recognition that those who stay now stay for who you truly are, not for the mask you wore. And this realization is one of the most healing experiences a soul can encounter. To be loved not for what you give or what you pretend to be, but for your unadorned presence. Of course, this journey is not without pain. The peeling away of illusion often means saying goodbye to relationships you once thought unshakable. There may be grief, there may be loneliness, and there may be moments when you question whether authenticity is worth the cost. But over time, the emptiness left by false bonds becomes fertile soil in which true connection can take root. In this soil, trust grows, honesty flourishes, and love becomes something far more sacred than approval. It becomes recognition. Imagine a circle of friends gathered around a fire. In the circle are those who know only your mask, who applaud your every compliance, who are content with the version of you that exists for their comfort. When you remove the mask, some will drift away, for the light of your truth unsettles them. But others will draw closer, their eyes meeting yours with a clarity that had never been there before. Around that fire, you discover the essence of belonging, not a crowd that applauds your performance, but a few who see your soul and choose to stay. The courage to be authentic is the courage to risk loss for the sake of truth. And yet, in that risk lies the only path to love that endures. For only when we stand as we are can another truly embrace us. Only when we reveal the fullness of our being can we hope to be met with the fullness of another. This is the paradox of connection. The more we seek to please, the less we are truly known, and the more we dare to be ourselves, the more deeply we can be loved. In the end, relationships that are real are not the ones without friction, nor the ones without disappointment. They are the ones that survive those trials and emerge stronger because of them. To abandon people-pleasing is to strip away illusion and in the process to invite into your life a rarer, more enduring form of intimacy. It is not an easy path, but it is the only one that leads to love that is both genuine and free. To live as a servant of others' approval is to live in quiet bondage. It is not a bondage with visible chains or locked doors, but an invisible prison woven from fear and habit. Each time we ask ourselves, will they approve of me, a link is added to the chain. Each time we silence our needs in order to maintain another's comfort, another lock turns in the cell. It begins softly, almost imperceptibly, but soon it consumes the spirit. The anxious whisper grows louder. Am I enough? Did I offend them? Do they still accept me? And when the exhaustion of endless giving takes its toll, resentment begins its work. Resentment is not born from generosity. It is born from generosity twisted into obligation. It is the soul's protest against living a life that is offered not from love but from fear. This cycle is vicious, for anxiety and resentment feed one another like serpents coiled together, Anxiety drives us to give beyond our limits, to say yes when our hearts cry out for rest. Resentment follows, poisoning the act with bitterness. Why do I always give and never receive? Why is my care never returned with the same devotion? And so the spirit erodes, day by day, until one awakens to find the well of joy has run dry. What remains is fatigue, irritability, and a deep sense of emptiness. But when the compulsion to please is broken, the cycle dissolves. It does not dissolve all at once. It unravels slowly, like a knot patiently loosened. At first there is guilt, for guilt is the residue of a life spent in obedience to others' expectations. Guilt whispers, "You are selfish. You will lose love if you put yourself first." Yet if one persists, if one acts not from rebellion but from inner alignment, peace begins to emerge. I recall a man who spoke of how he had spent decades attending every family gathering, every reunion, every obligation. To miss an event was, in his mind, a betrayal of loyalty, yet each gathering drained him. He returned home weary, resentful, and quietly resentful of the very people he had gone to honor. One day he declined. He sat in the quiet of his own home, haunted by guilt at first, convinced that others would see him as cold or uncaring. But as time passed, something extraordinary occurred. The guilt gave way to peace. He realized that to be present without willingness had been an act of dishonesty, both to himself and to his family. His body may have been at the table, but his heart had been absent. By reclaiming the choice to attend only when his presence was authentic, he not only reclaimed his serenity, but also brought greater truth into his relationships. This is the paradox. The moment we cease living for approval, we become more genuine, and in that genuineness, the quality of our presence deepens. Anxiety fades because we are no longer enslaved to the shifting opinions of others. Resentment fades because our giving is no longer coerced. It flows from freedom and therefore from love. Science, too, echoes what the soul already knows. Studies in mental health reveal that chronic people pleasing is closely tied to stress, depression, and even physical illness. The nervous system cannot thrive under the constant burden of self-betrayal. The body keeps score of every silenced truth, every swallowed no, every act of compliance that violates the self. It manifests in headaches, fatigue, sleeplessness, and disease. But when one begins to live in alignment with the inner voice, the body responds. Tension loosens, rest deepens, and vitality slowly returns. Liberation from the need to please is not only a psychological event, it is a physiological healing. It is no coincidence that those who live authentically often radiate a kind of health that goes beyond appearance. Their faces are lit with vitality, their voices carry strength, their presence exudes calm. This is not because life spares them suffering, but because they do not carry the unnecessary suffering of constant pretense. They have shed the heavy cloak of false obligation, and in its place they wear the lighter garment of truth. Yet let us not romanticize the journey. To step out of people pleasing is to enter a threshold marked by discomfort. There will be moments when anxiety returns, whispering that you are disappointing someone you love. There will be moments when resentment still stirs as the old habits of self-sacrifice clash with your new boundaries. But over time, as these boundaries are honored, the whispers grow quiet. A new rhythm emerges, one that flows not from fear but from authenticity. Anxiety asks, "What will they think of me?" Authenticity asks, "What do I think of myself?" Resentment asks, "Why do I give and never receive?" Authenticity asks, "Am I giving from freedom or compulsion?" In this shift of questions, the entire landscape of the soul is transformed. The truth is that peace cannot be found in the applause of others. Approval is a fleeting shadow. It comes and goes with their moods, their needs, their own insecurities. To tether one's worth to it is to live in perpetual unrest. Peace is found only when one's actions flow from inner alignment, when the yes and the no both rise from the same place of integrity. Then, even if others disapprove, one stands unshaken, for the ground of being is no longer outside but within. I think here of the oak tree. It does not anxiously twist its branches to please the shifting winds. It does not resent the storms that buffet it, nor the seasons that strip it bare. It stands, rooted in its essence, offering shade when it can, shedding leaves when it must. In its constancy, it becomes a sanctuary for others, not by bending to every demand, but by being unwaveringly itself. So it is with the human soul. When freed from the need to please, it becomes rooted, steady, and serene. The fading of anxiety and resentment is not the loss of care for others, but the purification of it. Love that is offered from fear is not love, but manipulation. Love that is offered from compulsion breeds only bitterness. But love that flows from freedom is pure, and in its purity it heals both giver and receiver. To live authentically is not to withdraw from connection, but to deepen it, for every act of giving becomes a true gift rather than an obligation weighed down by resentment. The path from bondage to freedom is one every soul must walk in its own way. Yet its fruits are universal, the quieting of fear, the dissolving of bitterness, the restoration of peace. To please others constantly is to erode the spirit. To live authentically is to restore it. In that restoration, anxiety and resentment no longer dominate. They recede like storms that once raged but have now passed, leaving behind a sky that is open, calm, and filled with light. When the endless drain of energy once wasted on pleasing others is released, something remarkable begins to happen. The currents of life that were once scattered outward, dispersed across countless attempts to earn approval, suddenly turn inward, and from there they rise upward. The mind, which for years had been preoccupied with the anxious refrain of what will they think of me, begins to clear. In that space of clarity, a new question emerges, one far more vital, far more life-giving. What do I long to create? It is a shift from dependence to freedom, from surviving on scraps of approval to feasting on the nourishment of one's own inner fire. This turning point is not merely psychological, but existential. To spend one's life tethered to the opinions of others is to live in exile from the true self. It is to stand outside the door of one's own house, peering in but never entering. But once the need to please is broken, the door opens. You step across the threshold, and suddenly the rooms of your being, long abandoned, are filled with light. In those rooms lie the forgotten passions, the dormant gifts, the creative impulses that had been silenced under the weight of compliance. Like seeds that have lain buried in winter soil, they stir and begin to grow. History offers us countless reminders of what becomes possible when human beings refuse to silence their inner vision. Consider Beethoven, who composed his greatest symphonies while deaf, defying not only his critics but the limitations of his own body. Had he chosen to conform, had he bowed to the judgment of others, his music would never have reached us, and the world would be infinitely poorer for it. Think of Einstein, whose theories dismantled the very framework of physics as it was then understood. He was ridiculed, dismissed, yet he did not falter. Imagine Rosa Parks, who in one quiet but resolute act of defiance shifted the course of history. Each of these figures was confronted with the demand to conform, to remain silent, to please the prevailing order. And each chose instead to remain faithful to an inner call. If they had silenced their vision for the comfort of others, their names would have been lost to history, and humanity would have been deprived of their gifts. But it is not only history's giants who carry this truth. It lives in the stories of ordinary lives that awaken to authenticity. I once heard of a woman who spent decades shaping her life to the expectations of her family. She married as she was told, worked as she was told, kept her passions hidden because they did not fit the mold she had been given. Yet inside, a hunger remained. When she turned 50, with her children grown and the weight of expectation no longer suffocating her, she enrolled in art school. She spoke with tears in her eyes. "For the first time I feel alive." This aliveness was not born from pleasing others, but from reclaiming the path of her own becoming. Creativity does not fade with age, it fades with suppression. The moment suppression lifts, even after years of silence, the soul begins to sing again. The truth is that authenticity is fertile ground. From it, both creativity and purpose spring forth. When we live to please, we live fragmented, chasing the shifting winds of approval. But when we live aligned with our inner truth, our energy becomes focused, and from that focus arises vision. Creativity is not merely the making of art or music. It is the shaping of life itself into something meaningful. It is expressed in the parent who finds new ways to nurture, in the teacher who dares to inspire beyond the textbook, in the entrepreneur who builds a business rooted in passion rather than profit alone. Creativity is the soul's natural expression when it is no longer confined. Purpose, too, reveals itself only when we shed the false skin of people pleasing. Purpose cannot be handed to us by others, nor discovered by living out their expectations. It emerges when we ask with courage, "What is mine to do in this world?" For some, it may be the pursuit of art; for others, the service of healing, the creation of beauty, the building of communities, or the quiet dedication to raising a family in love. Whatever form it takes, purpose is born of authenticity, never of compliance. And yet the path is not without fear. To claim one's creativity, to live with purpose, is to risk judgment. The world often resists what does not conform. Families may scoff, societies may mock, peers may dismiss. But this is the crucible of authenticity, whether one will abandon the inner call for the comfort of external approval, or whether one will endure discomfort in order to remain true. It is here that courage must rise, for the reward is not only the creation of something meaningful, but the deep and abiding peace that comes from living as oneself. When the fear of judgment loosens its grip, the imagination blooms. The mind that once calculated endlessly what others might think becomes free to wander, to dream, to experiment. In that freedom, mistakes are no longer terrifying, but part of the creative process. Failure is not shameful, but instructive. Each attempt, each stumble, each bold act becomes fuel for growth, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, one begins to notice the joy that springs from this way of living, the joy of being in harmony with oneself. There is also a subtle but profound shift in how one contributes to the world. A life spent in pleasing others often leaves little behind, for its energy is spent on maintenance rather than creation. But a life lived authentically leaves traces. Books written, art painted, communities strengthened, children raised with love, ideas shared, beauty cultivated. These traces ripple outward, touching lives beyond our own, extending into the future in ways we cannot measure. Creativity and purpose are not self-indulgent pursuits. They are the ways in which the soul gives back to life itself. The flourishing of creativity and purpose is, at its heart, the flowering of the self. It is what happens when we stop asking, "Who must I be for them?" and begin asking, "Who am I called to be for the world?" It is a return to the root of existence, where the individual is no longer a shadow of expectation, but a vessel of originality, carrying within them a unique gift that only they can bring forth. To stop pleasing others is not merely to withdraw, it is to create. It is to let the energies once squandered in fear be transmuted into vision, into action, into beauty. It is to live a life that is not second-hand, but original. And in that originality, both creativity and purpose find their home, blooming not as rare exceptions, but as the natural consequence of authenticity. The greatest transformation arrives not with thunder, but with a quiet recognition that seems almost too simple to hold such weight. We realize at last that we belong, not because we mold ourselves into what others wish to see, but because we dare to stand as we truly are. For much of life, the illusion of belonging tempts us into performance. We think, if I smile enough, if I say yes enough, if I hide the parts of me that offend or unsettle, then I will be welcomed, then I will be loved. And so we labor endlessly in this theater of acceptance, rehearsing roles that exhaust us, costumes that do not fit, lines that betray our own voice. Yet such belonging is fragile, for it depends entirely upon the ever-changing moods, needs, and expectations of others. The moment we falter in our performance, the stage collapses, and the audience disperses. What we mistook for love reveals itself as mere approval, and approval is a fickle master. But belonging rooted in authenticity, this is of another order. It cannot be taken away because it is not given by others to begin with. It arises from the unshakable ground of our being, from the recognition that our worth is not contingent, not conditional, not up for negotiation. When we begin to live from this place, something within us loosens, the endless bargaining ceases. We no longer trade pieces of our soul in exchange for the counterfeit coin of acceptance. Instead, we stand as ourselves, whole and unmasked, and in that standing we find a belonging that is no longer dependent but inherent. Consider the oak tree. It does not twist its branches into strange contortions to please the passing wind. It does not shrink its roots to fit into narrow soil, nor stretch itself unnaturally to mimic the shapes of nearby pines. It simply stands as it is, weathering seasons of storm and sun alike. Sometimes embraced by birds that nest in its branches, sometimes scarred by lightning or buffeted by harsh gales, it remains unyielding in essence. Its belonging is not earned, it is inherent in its being an oak. Likewise, when we no longer contort ourselves for the sake of acceptance, we begin to attract those who recognize us, who love us not for the role we play, but for the essence we embody. And perhaps more importantly, we begin to love ourselves, not for how well we conform, but for the courage it takes to remain true. This shift is not merely philosophical, it is lived and felt in the marrow of existence. I recall the story of a young man who confessed that for years he lived as a chameleon. In every friendship, in every romance, he became what he thought others wanted. With his family, he was obedient and agreeable. With his peers, bold and reckless, in love endlessly accommodating. Yet beneath these masks he felt a hollow ache. His life was crowded with people, yet he confessed he had never felt more alone. One day, weary of the strain, he chose to reveal his true self to a close friend, his doubts, his fears, his desires that did not fit the expectations placed upon him. He expected rejection. Instead, his friend embraced him with words that would alter his path. "I love you more for showing me this." In that moment, he glimpsed a new kind of belonging, not based on performance, but on truth. The human heart longs for such belonging. It is written deep into us, a yearning as natural as the need for air. But the tragedy of pleasing is that it offers only its counterfeit. It gives us the appearance of connection while robbing us of its substance. And so many wander through life surrounded yet unseen, celebrated yet unloved, accepted yet unknown. To step out of this pattern is frightening, for it feels like stepping into emptiness. To remove the mask risks exposure, and exposure risks rejection. Yet it is only through this risk that true belonging is found. For those who stay, who remain when the mask is gone, those are the ones who see us, who know us, who form the roots of real connection. Studies in psychology confirm what experience already whispers. Relationships marked by vulnerability and authenticity endure, while those based on pretense collapse under the weight of time. Couples who dare to reveal their imperfections report deeper intimacy. Friendships that survive conflict become stronger, not weaker. Even workplaces where authenticity is encouraged show greater creativity and loyalty. The evidence is everywhere. Belonging requires no performance, only presence. And yet, perhaps the deepest belonging is not even found in others, but in oneself. When we cease betraying our own values, when we stop silencing our own voice for the comfort of others, we begin to feel at home within. Many live as exiles in their own souls, forever negotiating with themselves to be less, to be quieter, to be more convenient. But when the bargaining ends, when we allow ourselves to inhabit our own truth without condition, an extraordinary peace emerges. It is the peace of no longer seeking permission to exist. From this inner belonging flows a courage that reshapes life. Decisions once clouded by fear of rejection become clear. Paths once avoided out of dread of disapproval become open. A woman who once refused to write because her family dismissed her dreams begins at last to put words to page, not because others approve, but because she knows it is hers to do. A man who spent years in a career chosen to please his parents finally pursues the vocation that stirs his spirit, not because the world praises him, but because he no longer needs it to. These lives are not easier, ejection still comes, misunderstandings still arise, but they are freer. And freedom, even with its risks, is worth infinitely more than acceptance built on falsehood. Belonging that requires performance is always conditional. It is the applause that fades when the play ends. But belonging rooted in authenticity is unconditional. It is not earned, not maintained, not negotiated. It simply is. To discover this is to discover liberation, for once we see that belonging cannot be purchased at the price of self-betrayal, we stop offering up our souls on the altar of approval. We begin instead to live, not as actors on a stage, but as beings who know that their place in the world is secure, not because they please, but because they are. To break the need to please others is not to become indifferent or cruel. It is to choose authenticity over illusion, integrity over performance, and freedom over fear. What happens then is nothing less than a rebirth. You discover the strength to say no. The depth of real relationships, the peace beyond anxiety, the flourishing of purpose, and the unshakable truth of belonging. This is not a journey away from others, but a journey toward the self. And when the self stands free, it becomes a light, steady, radiant, and unafraid, that guides not only its own path, but also inspires others to step into their own truth.